And welcome back to Hannity, and joining us now to weigh in on Donald Trump's Muslim ban proposal, 2016, Republican presidential candidate Carly Fiorina. Carly, it's good to see you. One of the things I've always admired about you is how you've been taking on Hillary, and you've been pointing out the hypocrisy of the so-called war on women. I want to ask you a question that's a little difficult. If somebody is raised in a theocracy like Saudi Arabia, where you are raised under Sharia and you're taught as a male that you can tell women what to wear, where to go, or how to dress. They can't go out in public without you, whether to go to school or work or not. Marital rape is non-existent there. If people are raised in that culture, do we have to worry that if they're coming to America, that maybe they want to bring those values with them because that's all they've known? In other words, is there a cultural divide that we should consider?
Well, certainly we know that Sharia law is counter to our Constitution and our way of life. On the other hand, Sean, it's also true that people in many parts of the world who are not Muslim also believe in very objectionable things. In China, for example, so many babies are aborted or left to die through exposure simply because they're female. So does that mean we have to worry about every Chinese who wants to become an American citizen?
Because I don't think the people want
Actually
that.
not.
That's a government regulation. But those that really,
well,
in other words, how do we ascertain if people want freedom?
With all due respect, it is mothers and fathers who choose to abort their children or leave them to die through exposure because they're female.
Because there's a one-child policy and they want a male.
One child. So why? But think about what you just said, Sean.
No,
because it's a one-child policy and they want a male.
Horrendous. I agree. It's evil.
My point is there are lots of cultures around the world who do not treat women with the same liberty and respect that we do here in the United States. That is absolutely true, and there's no question that Sharia law is counter to the Constitution.
All right, so then my follow-up question is this. My follow-up question is, okay, we both are saying the same thing, but should it be a factor? In other words, how do we ascertain if they crave the freedom that we take for granted, or if they want to bring those values with them, which has been a problem in Europe in some countries?
Well, I think it's a problem with all kinds of cultures, and certainly it has been a culture with some Muslims. But I also think that right now, honestly, Sean, if I may say, because of Donald Trump's comments, we're talking about all the wrong things. What we need to be talking about right now is what are the practical steps that can be taken to protect the homeland right now. So, for example, Tom Cotton in the Senate 2 days ago made a very reasonable proposal that says, you know what, despite the change in the Patriot Act, we need to make sure that investigators have access to all the NSA data, going back however long we should. Mike McCall made some very sensible proposals. It's also true that we now know once again that the government has been inept, that despite all that metadata before the Patriot Act changed, that these were two individuals in San Bernardino who had been radicalized years ago, who had been engaged in a pattern of conversation, and yet somehow we missed them, just like somehow we missed the Boston bombers.
Last question,
we
and I'm
need to
running
be
out of
talking
time.
about why there is government ineptitude, and it's failing to keep us safe. And we also need to ask every single candidate, including Donald Trump, what is your plan for defeating ISIS? Because I don't think he has one.
So my next point then is, okay, if you're acknowledging what all our intelligence officials are acknowledging, should we put a hold, a stop, until they get it right?
I don't think that's the right answer, but here's what I would also say. Barack Obama tries to distract us from his lack of a plan to defeat ISIS by talking about gun control. Donald Trump is attempting and succeeding in distracting us from the reality that he has no plan and no experience to defeat ISIS by talking about a ban on all Muslims, which will never happen. What we need to be talking about is, what is the plan to defeat ISIS? I have one here at home and abroad. That's what we ought to be talking about.
Carly Fiorina, always good to see you. Thank you for being with us.